In the bustling chaos of Los Angeles International Airport, amid the constant stream of hurried travelers, Keanu Reeves walked with quiet confidence. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt, worn jeans, and scuffed sneakers, he was a far cry from the flashy celebrities we often associate with the limelight. There was no entourage, no designer brands on display, just a man who blended seamlessly into the crowd. What set him apart, though, was the small silver crucifix hanging loosely around his neck. It wasn't flashy or ostentatious, but it held a quiet weight, a symbol of something much deeper than just a piece of jewelry. As he passed through the busy terminal, only a few noticed him, their curious glances lingering briefly before they went about their business. Keanu didn't seem to mind. He wasn't there to make a statement or draw attention. He was just himself, moving through life with the same unbothered pace that he brought to his acting career. There was something comforting in his simplicity, as if he had no need to prove anything. He wasn't a celebrity trying to be seen, just a man who had mastered the art of being present in his own skin. The quiet tension on the plane continued to build as Keanu Reeves remained calm and composed, refusing to hide his silver crucifix. Carla, the flight attendant, had asked him to conceal the necklace, citing the need to create a neutral environment for the passengers. But Keanu's response was measured and powerful, reminding her that his necklace wasn't a statement or a fashion choice. It was a part of who he was. His calm demeanor, paired with his unwavering stance, made it clear that he wasn't going to back down. He wasn't trying to start a confrontation. He was simply standing firm in his truth. Carla, on the other hand, felt the pressure mounting. As a flight attendant, she was trained to maintain order and respect, and she was used to managing difficult situations. However, something about this encounter felt different. As she tried to assert her authority, she realized that her discomfort wasn't about the rules. It was about her own judgment. The more she tried to control the situation, the more she began to question herself. The other passengers were noticing the exchange, and the atmosphere in the cabin shifted. What started as a small disagreement was now a moment of reflection for everyone on board. Keanu's refusal to comply wasn't defiance. It was an invitation to reconsider how we judge others. It was a reminder that true strength lies not in control, but in being unapologetically yourself, even in the face of discomfort. As the flight progressed and the plane soared into the sky, Keanu Reeves sat quietly in his first-class seat, completely at ease, radiating a calm that seemed to defy the usual chaos of air travel. His silver crucifix rested gently against his chest, visible to anyone who happened to glance in his direction. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't designed to make a statement, it was simply a part of him. Yet for Carla, the flight attendant, that humble necklace had become a source of growing discomfort. She couldn't shake the nagging feeling that it didn't belong in this space. Not because of its religious nature, but because it challenged the order she so carefully tried to maintain in her cabin. She had been trained to ensure the peace and comfort of all passengers, and something about Keanu's presence, his quiet strength, made her uneasy. She had worked with celebrities before, many of whom were demanding and loud, their egos filling up the entire cabin. But Keanu was different. He wasn't putting on a show. He wasn't making any demands. He was simply being himself, and that, in a strange way, felt like a challenge to her authority. Carla's unease grew to frustration, and she finally decided to approach him. In a calm voice, she reminded him of the airline's policy regarding the display of religious symbols in shared spaces. She framed it as an issue of creating a neutral environment for everyone. Keanu listened without flinching, his gaze steady, and simply asked if the same policy applied to other symbols, like a tree or a star. His response wasn't confrontational, it was thoughtful, and it made Carla pause. He wasn't trying to provoke anyone, yet there was something in his words that cut through the surface-level reasoning she had used to justify her request. When Keanu explained that the crucifix wasn't a fashion statement, but a symbol that had helped him survive, something inside Carla shifted. She had expected him to argue, to defend himself in a way that would justify her actions, but instead he simply spoke the truth with quiet conviction. His words hung in the air, powerful yet gentle. The discomfort that Carla had initially felt started to dissolve, replaced by a new understanding, one she wasn't ready for. She had been so focused on maintaining control and upholding the rules that she had missed the deeper truth. Sometimes kindness and understanding require vulnerability. Keanu didn't need to fight for his beliefs. He just needed to stand by them. And in that moment, Carla realized that her discomfort had nothing to do with the crucifix or its symbolism. It had everything to do with her own unwillingness to accept something different, something real. The silence that followed was thick with a sense of realization, not just for Carla, but for everyone who had been watching this quiet confrontation unfold. The atmosphere in the cabin had shifted, and no one would leave the flight the same way they had entered. The situation on the plane escalated quickly as Carla, the flight attendant, pressed forward with her request. The tension between her and Keanu Reeves was palpable now, but it wasn't loud or overt. It was subtle, almost a whisper in the air, and yet it reverberated across the entire first-class cabin. Keanu sat unmoving, calm and steady, his eyes locked on Carla's as she delivered her request once again, this time with more authority. She asked him, politely but firmly, to conceal the small silver crucifix around his neck. For a moment, the weight of her words seemed to hang in the air like the lingering smell of a storm about to break. She was only doing her job, she told herself. But there was something about Keanu's response that rattled her. When he said, "This isn't a fashion statement, it's a part of who I am," his voice didn't rise in anger or defensiveness. It was simply truth, delivered with quiet strength. Keanu's calmness contrasted sharply with her growing irritation, a feeling she couldn't quite suppress. She had been trained to maintain control of situations like this, to uphold policies and ensure that everyone adhered to the rules of the cabin. But Keanu wasn't trying to fight her. He wasn't raising his voice or demanding anything. He wasn't making a spectacle of himself. He was, in fact, the most serene presence in the room. His refusal to back down wasn't aggressive. It was a quiet assertion of his right to be himself, to wear something that held personal meaning without apology. As the minutes passed, the cabin's energy shifted. It started as a small ripple, a few passengers glancing nervously at each other, but it quickly grew. The tension, at first nearly invisible, began to settle over the entire space like an unspoken current. People shifted in their seats, trying to understand what was happening. The flight attendants at the back of the cabin exchanged looks, sensing something had changed. The atmosphere had transformed from calm and professional to something else entirely, something that couldn't be ignored. Carla, sensing the shift in the air, tried to regain control. She moved back down the aisle, this time more rigid in her movements. She no longer felt the quiet confidence of someone in charge. Now, her every step felt calculated, as though she was trying to prove that she still had the upper hand. But Keanu wasn't backing down. When Carla returned to confront him, the mood had changed. Her tone, which had once been professional and detached, now held an undercurrent of frustration. She informed him that other passengers were feeling uncomfortable with the display of his necklace, and that if he refused to comply, she'd have to escalate the situation to the captain. Keanu's response was simple yet profound. "You do what you need to do, but know this: the problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes." His words were firm, but not harsh. They cut through the surface of the conversation, reaching deeper into something more complex. Carla paused, stunned by his clarity. It was as if, in that moment, the entire cabin became aware of the deeper issue at hand. This wasn't about the necklace. It wasn't about a simple rule. It was about judgment, about how society often sees difference as something to be hidden, something to be made neutral. Keanu's calm demeanor, his quiet refusal to comply, made a powerful statement in itself. It wasn't just about his right to wear a symbol of faith. It was about the courage to remain true to oneself, even when the world around you demands conformity. As the flight continued, it became clear to everyone on board that what had started as a small disagreement was now a much larger conversation. Carla's professional mask had cracked. The rigid authority she had clung to had faltered under the weight of Keanu's quiet strength. He had not raised his voice, but in the silence, he had said more than words ever could. The passengers began to notice the tension in the air. and many of them began to reflect on what they were witnessing. Was it really the necklace that was causing discomfort, or was it the idea that someone might be bold enough to stand firm in their beliefs and identity? Keanu wasn't trying to force anyone to believe what he believed. He was simply being himself, and that was something Carla and the passengers around her would have to reckon with. By the time the flight landed, the incident was no longer just a minor dispute. It had become a moment that would stay with everyone on board for a long time. Keanu had not only stood up for his right to be himself, but he had also quietly challenged the passengers, the flight attendants, and even Carla to confront their own biases and assumptions. In the end, his message was simple. Kindness and truth could never be hidden behind policies and procedures. As the confrontation on the plane continued to unfold, Carla, the flight attendant, found herself at a crossroads, both professionally and personally. Keanu Reeves had quietly but firmly refused to hide his crucifix, a symbol of his faith. And it had become more than just a disagreement over policy. It was a moment of self-reflection for everyone involved. As the tension mounted, the passengers began to sense something deeper was happening. It wasn't about a small silver necklace anymore. It was about something far more significant: judgment, identity, and the choices we make when we are challenged by something unfamiliar. Keanu had stood his ground not with anger or resentment, but with quiet strength, and in doing so he forced Carla to question her own assumptions. She had initially seen his simple crucifix as a disruption to the uniformity of the cabin, a symbol that might create discomfort for others. But Keanu's calm, measured response revealed a different truth. His necklace wasn't a weapon of provocation, it was a part of him, something that had grounded him during difficult times in his life. When he spoke of the moments when that crucifix had saved his life, his words carried a weight that no one could ignore. It wasn't just about a religious symbol. It was a reminder of survival, of faith, of resilience. Carla, caught in a professional role that demanded neutrality, was suddenly forced to confront her own biases. She had spent years following protocol, adhering to rules that were meant to keep the peace. But in that moment, the very rules she had relied on to define her professionalism began to feel hollow. She wasn't just protecting the passengers, she was protecting herself from something that made her uncomfortable. The truth that Keanu spoke wasn't just directed at her. It was a truth about the way society had conditioned people to view faith and symbols. The discomfort wasn't with the necklace, it was with the way people had been taught to view certain expressions of identity as divisive. As the moment stretched on, Carla's resolve began to crack. She had seen many celebrities on flights before, some demanding and entitled, others indifferent to the rules. But Keanu was different. He wasn't trying to make a scene, he wasn't flaunting his faith to make a point. He simply was who he was, unapologetically so. His quiet strength became the catalyst for an internal shift that Carla hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about the crucifix anymore. It was about the larger question of how much we allow ourselves to be influenced by the expectations of others. How often do we compromise who we are in order to fit into a mold, to avoid conflict, to avoid being judged? The energy on the plane shifted as the passengers took notice of the exchange. The initial awkwardness gave way to a sense of solidarity with Keanu, who wasn't seeking validation but instead offering a simple truth. He wasn't backing down, not because he wanted to win, but because he knew who he was, and he wasn't afraid to stand by that truth. In doing so, he unintentionally opened a door for others to reflect on their own convictions. For Carla, the realization was hard to swallow. She wasn't prepared for the emotional impact of this encounter. The tension in the cabin had been palpable, but what was even more intense was the shift within herself. She had started the interaction with a sense of authority, but by the end of it, she was left with a deeper understanding of what true professionalism meant. It wasn't about control. It wasn't about adhering to rigid policies. True professionalism was about treating others with respect, even when their choices challenged your own perspective. As the flight continued, the weight of the moment lingered. Keanu sat quietly, his crucifix resting above his heart, a symbol of faith and survival that could no longer be ignored. The passengers around him began to reflect on the power of his words, and for Carla, the experience became a turning point. When the plane landed and the video of the encounter went viral, she didn't react with defensiveness or shame. Instead, she took a long, hard look at herself and the way she had judged not just Keanu, but others who didn't fit the mold she had been conditioned to expect. A few weeks later, Carla sat in her apartment, holding the silver crucifix that Keanu had given her. She reflected on the moment that had changed her life. The video had become a symbol of grace over conflict, kindness over control. It was a moment that not only changed the trajectory of her career, but also the way she saw herself and others. It reminded her that real strength lies not in maintaining control, but in embracing vulnerability and authenticity. As the tension aboard the flight grew and the conflict between Keanu Reeves and the flight attendant Carla reached its peak, something deeper began to emerge, not just within the characters involved, but in the atmosphere of the entire cabin. The moment was no longer just about a simple silver necklace. It had transcended that, turning into a poignant, powerful reflection on judgment, perception, and the courage to be unapologetically oneself. Keanu, calm and unflinching, had remained firm in his belief that his necklace, a symbol of his faith, was not something to be hidden or compromised. His quiet strength in that moment would leave an indelible mark on everyone present, as well as everyone who would eventually see the footage of the encounter. What made Keanu's actions so profound was not just his refusal to hide his faith, but his ability to stand firm without seeking to provoke, without escalating the situation. The more Carla pressed him to conceal the crucifix around his neck, the more he showed that it wasn't just about the symbol. It was about his identity and the courage to live that truth openly. Keanu's response wasn't defensive. It was grounded in authenticity and respect for himself, and, in a way, for others as well. He wasn't trying to impose his beliefs on anyone else. He was simply being true to himself. The contrast between Keanu's calm, grounded demeanor and Carla's increasingly tense and rigid posture spoke volumes. Carla, a seasoned professional who had spent her career navigating customer service with poise and control, found herself unraveling in a way that exposed her own biases, insecurities, and misunderstandings. In that moment, Keanu revealed something that Carla had never truly considered: the line between maintaining professional decorum and living in authenticity. As a flight attendant, Carla had been trained to ensure that every passenger felt comfortable, that the flight went smoothly, and that any issues were handled with grace. But in her efforts to maintain neutrality, she had overlooked something important. The neutrality she so carefully adhered to wasn't as neutral as she believed. In her attempt to ensure that the cabin remained a safe space for all, she had subconsciously allowed her own biases and discomfort to dictate how she interacted with others. Keanu's crucifix was not the problem. The problem was the discomfort she felt seeing someone so unapologetically themselves, someone who was living out their beliefs without asking for permission or validation. Keanu's refusal to back down, and his calm insistence that he would not hide who he was, became a powerful lesson for everyone on board. His words carried a weight that made Carla's seemingly professional demeanor begin to crack. "The problem isn't what's on my chest," he said. "It's what's in your eyes." Those words hit harder than any policy or protocol could. They were a quiet challenge to the way people had been conditioned to view others, to judge them based on their outward symbols, their expressions of faith or identity, rather than looking beyond the surface to understand the person behind those symbols. Carla, who had spent her career hiding behind the facade of professionalism, now had to face something that was not easily ignored. She had judged Keanu not just based on his outward appearance, but based on an assumption that someone dressed in such an understated way, someone who wore a small crucifix, was out of place in first class. She had allowed herself to slip into a mindset that, while unintentional, was rooted in societal biases that equated wealth and status with a person's worth, and that judged others who didn't fit that mold. Keanu's presence, however, challenged that perception. He wasn't there to flaunt his fame or his faith, but to simply be himself, in a way that others would do well to emulate. The conflict didn't end with Keanu's statement, though. The passengers aboard the flight, who had initially been silent observers, began to feel the impact of the confrontation. It wasn't just about a simple argument over a necklace. It had evolved into a subtle but powerful moment of reflection for everyone. The quiet energy in the cabin shifted from one of discomfort to one of solidarity. Passengers who had been subtly judging Keanu, or even the flight attendant, now found themselves reassessing their own views. Many had taken out their phones to record the encounter, and soon the footage would go viral, shared across the world. What began as a small disagreement would become a worldwide conversation about respect, identity, and the courage to remain authentic, no matter the circumstances. For Carla, the aftermath of the encounter was just as important as the moment itself. She was faced with the reality of her actions, and unlike many, she did not hide from them. The video went viral and the world saw her falter, but instead of retreating into defensiveness or shame, she chose to confront her mistakes. She reflected on her actions, realizing that what Keanu had shown her was far more than a lesson in tolerance. It was a reminder of the importance of accepting people for who they truly are, without judgment. It was about recognizing the humanity in others and the courage it takes to stand firm in your own truth, no matter how uncomfortable it may make others feel. In the weeks that followed, Carla found herself sitting with the lessons she had learned from that flight. She realized that professionalism was not just about following policies and protocols. It was about creating a space where people could exist without fear of judgment. And when she looked back on her life, on her work, she realized that she had been hiding behind a mask of control for far too long. The truth that Keanu had shown her and that she had been forced to face would become a part of her. She could no longer hide behind her role as a flight attendant or her perceived need to maintain a neutral environment. The truth was far more complex and far more human than she had ever realized. Keanu's influence did not end when the plane landed. His simple act of standing by his beliefs had ripple effects that would be felt long after the flight. It reminded Carla and countless others who saw the video that true strength lies not in control, but in authenticity. As the days passed after the flight incident, the story of Keanu Reeves' unwavering stand for his beliefs continued to resonate in a way that no one had anticipated. His calm but firm response to the flight attendant's demand to remove his crucifix had sparked something much larger than just an on-the-spot confrontation. It was a deep reflection on identity, respect, and personal courage in a society that often asks people to conceal their true selves in exchange for acceptance. The aftermath of that moment became a catalyst for change, not just for Keanu, but for Carla, the flight attendant, and for everyone who had witnessed the incident, whether in person or through the viral footage that spread across social media. The video quickly went viral, capturing not just the physical confrontation, but the quiet strength that Keanu exhibited in the face of an unexpected challenge. As people watched Keanu's composed response to Carla's demands, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at how he remained true to himself, without shouting, without anger. His words were not meant to provoke, but to educate. "The problem isn't what's on my chest, it's what's in your eyes," he said, his voice calm and steady. Those words stuck with many viewers, striking a chord deep within them. It wasn't about the necklace. It was about the bigger issue of respecting people's rights to live authentically, no matter the setting or the judgment of others. The public reaction was overwhelming. Thousands of people expressed their support for Keanu, sharing stories of their own experiences with judgment, identity, and faith. Keanu's stance had ignited a conversation about the importance of standing up for one's beliefs and identity, even when faced with uncomfortable or hostile situations. Many saw him as a symbol of integrity, a man who refused to conform to the pressures of society. It was a reminder that authenticity isn't just a choice, it's an act of courage. Keanu had not only defended his personal right to wear the crucifix, but had also shown that it's okay to be unapologetically yourself in a world that often encourages people to hide behind facades for the sake of fitting in. But as the story gained traction, it also began to bring about deeper introspection within Carla. The footage of the incident had put her in the spotlight in a way she had never anticipated. While many had sympathized with her role as a flight attendant, some began to criticize her actions, questioning why she had felt so compelled to challenge Keanu's choice of jewelry. She was the embodiment of a professional who had been trained to follow the rules, to keep everything running smoothly. Yet in that moment, the lines between professionalism and personal bias blurred, and Carla found herself facing the consequences of her actions. For Carla, the initial backlash was difficult to bear. She had always prided herself on being a courteous, professional flight attendant. She had dedicated years to learning the ins and outs of her job, and this moment had shattered the image she had worked so hard to maintain. In the wake of the incident, she found herself grappling with the realization that her actions had been shaped not just by her training, but by her own biases, however unintentional they were. She had felt uncomfortable seeing Keanu's crucifix and had assumed that it was out of place in the first-class cabin, a space often associated with wealth and status. This assumption had led her to make a snap judgment without understanding the person behind the symbol. The confrontation had shaken her, but it also became an opportunity for reflection. Over time, Carla chose to address the situation head-on. Instead of hiding from the criticism or blaming the circumstances, she decided to learn from her mistake. She issued a public apology, acknowledging that her actions had been driven by preconceived notions and discomfort, not by the principles of fairness and respect she had always believed in. She took full responsibility for her part in the altercation and expressed a genuine desire to understand why she had reacted the way she did. Her apology was heartfelt, and many people, including Keanu, recognized her willingness to grow from the experience. The public response to Carla's apology was mixed, but many were impressed by her humility. It was clear that the incident had changed her perspective on professionalism and respect. She began to see her role not just as a service provider, but as someone who had the responsibility to create a space where everyone felt seen and respected, regardless of their identity or appearance. This realization didn't just affect her work, it affected her outlook on life. She had been so focused on maintaining control and adhering to the rules that she had failed to recognize the deeper needs of the people she was serving. Keanu, for his part, handled the entire situation with grace and composure. His response to Carla's public apology was supportive, saying that he appreciated her willingness to confront her biases and make amends. He didn't hold a grudge or use the incident as an opportunity to further his own agenda. Instead, he quietly reiterated his belief that people should be free to live as their true selves, without fear of judgment. His response, like his stance on the plane, was a reminder of the power of forgiveness and understanding. It was a moment of personal growth for both him and Carla, but also for the entire public who had witnessed the unfolding of events. As the dust settled, the incident became a defining moment for both Keanu and Carla. Keanu's actions and words left a lasting impact on the public, reminding everyone that it is okay to stand firm in your beliefs and live authentically. For Carla, the experience was a catalyst for self-examination, pushing her to confront her own biases and recognize the importance of creating an inclusive environment. Both individuals had learned valuable lessons in the wake of the confrontation, and their journey was far from over. In the end, the incident aboard the flight was more than just a clash of personalities. It was a powerful reminder of the complexities of identity, faith, and respect, and the courage it takes to be true to oneself in a world that often demands conformity. It was a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of the airplane cabin, inspiring countless individuals to embrace their authentic selves, no matter the consequences. The story of Keanu Reeves and the flight attendant serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of staying true to one's beliefs, even in the face of adversity. One of the key lessons here is the value of personal authenticity and standing firm in your identity. In a world that often pushes us to conform, Keanu's calm yet resolute response shows that we can express our individuality with dignity and respect, without feeling pressured to hide who we are. This story also highlights the significance of self-reflection and growth. Carla's journey from judgment to understanding teaches us that it's okay to make mistakes, but it's even more important to learn from them, apologize when necessary, and strive for personal improvement. In a broader sense, it reminds us that tolerance, respect for others, and the ability to confront our own biases are essential in creating a more inclusive and compassionate society. Ultimately, the story urges us all to embrace our true selves and be open to understanding and respecting the differences in others. Whether it's on a plane or in everyday life, this lesson of authenticity and growth is one we can all carry with us.